The morning sun barely peeked through the worn curtains as 12-year-old Andor wiped sleep from his eyes. The familiar sound of his mom's humming drifted from their tiny kitchen, mixing with the aroma of discount store coffee. He smiled, knowing she was trying to stay cheerful despite their struggles. Getting dressed was always a challenge. Andrew's cerebral palsy meant his legs didn't want to cooperate, but he'd worked out his own system over the years. First the right leg, then the left, one careful movement at a time. His crutches waited patiently by the bed, their rubber grips worn smooth from years of use. "Baby, you want some cereal?" his mom called out. She always made sure he ate something before school, even if it meant she went without. Andrew could hear the worry in her voice, the same worry that had been there since his dad passed away 3 years ago. "Coming, Mom," he called back, his voice clear and strong, the one part of him that never gave him trouble. As he made his way to the kitchen, the floorboards creaked under his crutches. Their apartment wasn't much, but it was home. Pictures of Andor and his mom covered one wall, showing his growth from a tiny baby to the young man he was becoming. His mom worked 2 jobs, days at the grocery store and evenings cleaning offices. The schedule was tough, but she never complained. She just hummed her favorite gospel songs and kept pushing forward. Andor knew money was tight. He'd seen her counting coins late at night when she thought he was asleep. That's why he'd started singing at the train station 6 months ago. The first day was terrifying. His heart had pounded so hard he thought it might jump right out of his chest. But then he opened his mouth, and everything changed. People stopped. They listened. They smiled. At school, kids sometimes stared at his crutches or whispered behind his back. But at the train station, nobody looked at his legs. They only heard his voice. Old women would close their eyes and sway. Busy business people would pause their phone calls. Even the grumpy ticket seller would crack a smile. Andrew Washington, his music teacher, had once said, "Your voice is a gift from above." Those words stayed with him, warming him like sunshine on cold days. When he sang, he wasn't the disabled kid anymore. He was just a boy sharing something beautiful with the world. Today would be like most days. After school, he'd make his way to the 51st Street station. His spot was always there waiting, a quiet corner near the south entrance where the acoustics made his voice soar. His old baseball cap would sit ready for any spare change kind strangers might share. Some days were better than others. Sometimes he'd make enough for groceries. Other times, barely enough for a sandwich. But every penny helped, and more importantly, singing made him feel alive. His mom worried about him performing alone, but the station security guard, Mr. B, always kept a watchful eye out. As Andrew finished his cereal, his mom kissed the top of his head. "You're my brave boy," she whispered, like she did every morning. Her words carried the weight of both pride and concern. Andrew hugged her tight, breathing in the familiar scent of her coconut shampoo. "Remember," she said, adjusting his collar, "you're not defined by what you can't do. You're defined by what's in your heart." She'd been saying that since he was little, and it had become their family motto. Andrew grabbed his backpack and crutches, ready to face another day. The morning sun had grown stronger now, painting their small kitchen in warm light. As he headed for the door, he started humming one of his favorite songs. His mom joined in, their voices blending in perfect harmony. Out in the hallway, the smell of their neighbor's cooking filled the air. Someone's radio played soft blues music. A baby cried somewhere upstairs. This was his world, not perfect, but full of life and music. And today, just maybe, would be the day something amazing happened. That's what Andrew believed every morning, because as his mom always said, hope doesn't cost a thing, but it's worth everything. Word spread through the neighborhood like honey dripping down a warm biscuit, slow but sweet. The boy who sang at 51st Street Station wasn't just another street performer. He was something special. The regulars started calling him Little Soul, and the name stuck faster than gum on a hot sidewalk. Miss Rose, who ran the corner store, always kept a cold bottle of water waiting for him. "Can't let that golden voice get dry," she'd say, her eyes crinkling with kindness. She remembered what it was like raising her own kids on a tight budget, and something about Andrew's determination reminded her of her younger self. Every Tuesday and Thursday, old Mr. Johnson would shuffle down from his apartment above the laundromat, carrying brown paper bags filled with peanut butter sandwiches. "My Dorothy used to say music feeds the soul, but a growing boy needs real food too," he'd tell Andra, his voice rough with age but warm with caring. The morning rush brought business suits and briefcases, hurrying past with coffee cups clutched tight. But when Andra started singing, something magical happened. Footsteps would slow, phones would lower, eyes would soften. His voice had a way of making people remember what mattered. Mrs. Chen from the dry cleaners started bringing her granddaughter to listen. "See?" she'd whisper, "that's what courage looks like." The little girl would watch, wide-eyed, as Andra balanced on his crutches, his voice soaring above the rumble of passing trains. The security guard, Mr. B, had become Andra's unofficial guardian angel at the station. "This here's my jurisdiction," he'd say with a wink, keeping watch from his post. He'd seen plenty of street performers come and go, but something about Andra's spirit touched even his weathered heart. Some days, when Andra's legs were especially uncooperative, the station's cleaning lady would quietly place a plastic chair near his spot. She never said anything, just nodded and smiled, mother's wisdom in her eyes. Andra would thank her, and she'd wave it away like it was nothing at all. Regular commuters began marking their days by his songs. The nurse who worked night shifts would request gospel tunes in the morning. The construction worker with paint-stained boots always asked for old soul classics. A group of high school students made it their mission to film every performance on their phones. "You're going viral, kid," one teenager told him, showing Andra a video that had thousands of views. Andra just smiled, not quite understanding what all the fuss was about. He was just doing what he loved, trying to help his mom make ends meet. The tips got better as his reputation grew. Some days, crisp bills would join the scattered coins in his baseball cap. A few kind souls even tried to give him 20s, but Andra always politely declined anything that felt too much like charity. His mom had taught him about pride, about earning his way. Local shop owners started looking out for him too. The pizza place would send over a hot slice during lunch hour. The bookstore lady kept a chair ready if he needed to rest. Even the grumpy owner of the hardware store would nod respectfully when Andra passed by. On rainy days, someone would always appear with an umbrella. During cold snaps, mysterious thermoses of hot chocolate would find their way to him. The neighborhood had quietly adopted him as their own, wrapping him in a protective embrace that felt like a warm blanket on a cold day. His mom noticed the change too. Customers at her grocery store would ask about her son, the singer. Her co-workers shared videos of Andra's performances. The pride in her eyes when she talked about him could light up the darkest room. "You're bringing people together," she told him one evening as they counted the day's earnings at their kitchen table. "And that's worth more than all the money in the world." Andra nodded, understanding that something bigger than himself was happening. The train station had become more than just a place to perform. It was where businessmen remembered their childhood dreams, where tired workers found a moment of peace, where strangers became friends, connected by the thread of music and hope. Someone had taped a small sign next to his regular spot, "Little Soul performed here." Simple words, but they meant the world to Andra. He wasn't invisible anymore. He wasn't just the disabled kid. He was Little Soul, and his music was making a difference, one song at a time. Winter had wrapped Chicago in its icy embrace that morning. The kind of cold that made your bones ache and your breath freeze in front of your face. Andra rubbed his hands together at the train station, his crutches propped carefully against the wall. His legs felt stiffer than usual in the cold, but his heart was warm with purpose. The morning crowd shuffled past, bundled up like colorful penguins in their winter coats. Andra closed his eyes, took a deep breath, and began to sing. "A change is gonna come" flowed from his lips, smooth as honey and strong as steel. His voice echoed through the station, cutting through the usual noise of trains and footsteps. A young woman paused, phone in hand. Something about the boy's voice, so pure and powerful, made her forget about her rushing morning. She started recording, capturing the way Andra swayed slightly as he sang, his face lifted toward the fluorescent lights as if they were stage spotlights. The cold couldn't touch him when he was singing. Each word carried the weight of hope, each note filled with the dreams of a better tomorrow. Regular commuters stopped in their tracks, forming a small semicircle around him. Even the rushing business people slowed their pace, as if caught in the gravity of his voice. An old man wiped his eyes quietly. A mother held her child closer. A teenager removed his headphones, mouth slightly open in wonder. The song spoke of struggle and hope, of pain and perseverance, things Andrew knew all too well. His voice cracked slightly on the high notes, not from lack of skill, but from raw emotion. The young woman's hands trembled as she kept recording. She'd seen street performers before, but this was different. This wasn't just talent, it was pure soul pouring out into the cold morning air. The way he balanced on his legs, the strength in his voice despite his physical challenges, the honest emotion in every word, it all came together in a moment of pure magic. By evening, the video was everywhere. It started on social media, then spread like wildfire. People shared it with comments like, "This gave me chills," and "had me crying on my lunch break." The views climbed from thousands to hundreds of thousands, then millions. Local news stations picked up the story. Chicago's singing angel, one headline read. Another called him the voice that stops time. Reporter vans started showing up at the station, but Andrew kept singing, unchanged by the attention. His mom watched the coverage at home, tears rolling down her cheeks. Comments poured in from around the world. "This kid has more talent in his pinky than most people have in their whole body. The way he sings about change coming, I believe him. Someone get this boy a record deal." The video crossed language barriers, touching hearts in countries Andrew had only read about in school. But it wasn't just the voice that moved people. It was everything else they saw in that 3-minute clip. The way other commuters protected him from the cold. How the station guard stood watchfully nearby. The gentle way he handled his crutches between songs. The dignity in his posture despite his challenges. Teachers at school started treating him differently. Some students who'd never spoken to him before suddenly wanted to be his friend. The attention felt strange, like wearing someone else's shoes. Andrew just wanted to sing, to help his mom, to make people's days a little brighter. His regular audience worried about him. "Don't let them change you, baby," Miss Rose said one morning, pressing a warm muffin into his hands. Mr. Johnson nodded in agreement. "You just keep singing your truth." The viral video captured more than just a song. It captured hope in its purest form, the kind that rises from struggle, that persists despite obstacles, that refuses to be silenced by circumstance. Andrew hadn't been trying to go viral. He'd just been doing what he'd always done, sharing his gift, helping his family, and believing in better days ahead. As cameras flashed and reporters called, Andrew kept his focus on the simple truth his mother had taught him. It's not about being famous, it's about being faithful to who you are. Each morning, he still made his way to his spot, set down his crutches, and sang his heart out. Because that's what he was born to do, whether one person was listening or a million. Fame arrived like an unexpected storm, bringing both rain and lightning. Andrew's viral video had opened doors, but it had also let in some cold drafts. People he'd never met were making money from his story, selling t-shirts with his face, using his voice in remixes without asking. His simple morning songs had become something he barely recognized. School changed too. The hallways felt different now. Some kids who'd never noticed him before suddenly wanted to be his best friend. Others whispered behind their hands when he passed by. "It's just because of the video," they'd say, not quite quietly enough. "He's not even that good." His regular spot at the train station didn't feel the same anymore. People held up phones instead of just listening. They interrupted his songs to ask for selfies. Some days, the crowd got so big that commuters couldn't get through, and the station manager had to ask them to move along. "Baby, you don't have to keep doing this," his mom said one evening, watching him rub his tired legs. The cold weather made his muscles ache more than usual, and standing for long periods had become harder. But Andrew shook his head. "Music's all I've got, Mom," he whispered, though his voice didn't carry the same confidence it once had. The internet could be a cruel place. For every kind comment about his talent, there seemed to be another questioning everything about him. Some people said he was faking his disability for attention. Others claimed his mom was exploiting him. A few even suggested the whole thing was a marketing stunt. Mr. B, the security guard, noticed the change in Andrew's spirit. The boy's songs didn't soar as high as they used to. "You know what I see?" he said one quiet morning. "I see a young man carrying a weight that ain't his to bear. Sometimes the best thing to do is set it down and remember who you were before all this noise started." Miss Rose from the corner store found Andrew crying one day behind her shop. She didn't ask questions, just sat with him, her presence steady as a heartbeat. "People will always talk," she finally said, "but they can't take your voice unless you give it to them." The local news did a follow-up story, but they focused on the controversy instead of the music. They interviewed random people who'd never even heard him sing in person. Some experts debated whether street performing was appropriate for a disabled child. Nobody asked Andor what he thought. His grades started slipping. The joy of singing began to feel like a heavy backpack full of other people's expectations. Some nights, he'd lie awake, wondering if he should just stop performing altogether. The money wasn't worth the pain anymore. One particularly rough morning, Andrew didn't go to his usual spot. Instead, he sat in the park, watching pigeons peck at breadcrumbs. An old woman on a nearby bench was humming softly to herself, completely lost in her own little world of music. Something about her peaceful expression reminded him of simpler days. His mom found him there during her lunch break. She sat down without a word, pulling out sandwiches from her work bag. They ate in comfortable silence, watching the city life flow around them. Finally, she spoke. "You know what makes your voice special? It's not the views or the likes, or what anybody says about it. It's the love you put into every note." Andrew thought about all the mornings at the station before the video went viral. He remembered the tired nurses swaying to his gospel songs, the construction workers humming along to soul classics, the kids dancing with their parents. He thought about how music had always been his way of adding beauty to the world, not a path to fame. That evening, he pulled out his old notebook, the one where he wrote down song lyrics and random thoughts. On a fresh page, he wrote, "Your voice is yours. Nobody can tell your story but you." The words weren't just about singing anymore. They were about finding his way back to himself in a world that suddenly wanted to define him. The man in the gray coat had been watching for weeks. Nobody noticed him. He was good at being invisible. Sometimes he'd pretend to read a newspaper, other times he'd act like he was waiting for a train. But his eyes were always on Andra, studying every detail of the young singer's life. His name was David Lin, though most people knew him as the founder of Tomorrow Tech, one of the biggest technology companies in the world. Worth billions, he could have been anywhere, doing anything. Instead, here he was, standing in a Chicago train station, watching a boy with crutches sing his heart out. David understood struggle. 30 years ago, he'd been a poor immigrant kid, learning English from old TV shows, sleeping on a relative's couch. Before the success, before the money, before everything, he'd known what it meant to fight for every step forward. He noticed things others might miss. How Andrew adjusted his weight between songs to ease the pressure on his legs. The way his mom would sometimes watch from a distance during her break, pride and worry mixing on her face. The small kindnesses from regular commuters, a bottle of water here, a warm scarf there. David had seen the viral video like everyone else, but he wasn't interested in the views or the comments. He saw something deeper, a spark that reminded him of himself at that age. The determination in Andrew's eyes, the way he kept showing up despite everything, the pure love of what he did, it was familiar. One morning, he watched a group of teenagers mock Andrew's walking. The boy didn't respond, just kept singing, his voice steady even as his eyes glistened. David's hands clenched in his pockets. He'd faced bullies too, back when his clothes were secondhand and his accent was thick. He'd done his research quietly. Learned about Andrew's medical history, his mom's 2 jobs, their struggle to make ends meet. He'd had his team look into the best treatments for cerebral palsy, the most innovative physical therapy programs. But he knew throwing money at something wasn't always the answer. What struck him most was how Andrew handled the darkness that came with his viral fame. Instead of becoming bitter, the boy had grown more determined. His voice had gained something new, a depth that only comes from knowing both joy and pain. The regular station crowd still protected Andrew in their own way. The security guard's watchful presence, the cleaning lady's gentle smile, the store owner's quiet support. It was a community holding one of their own. David understood that too. Success meant nothing without people who believed in you. He watched Andrew write in his notebook between songs, probably working on lyrics or thoughts. The boy had talent, yes, but more importantly, he had heart. David had seen too many gifted people lose their way when success came too fast, too soon. Some mornings, Andrew's singing would draw business people out of their usual rush. They'd stand there, briefcases forgotten at their feet, lost in the music. David saw himself in them too, how easy it was to forget what mattered in the chase for success. The cold was getting worse, and David noticed Anders struggling more with his balance. The boy never complained, but pain would flash across his face when he thought nobody was looking. It reminded David of his own mother, who'd worked through illness and exhaustion to give him a chance at education. After weeks of watching, David knew it was time to step forward. Not as a billionaire with a checkbook, but as someone who understood the weight of dreams and the price of pursuing them. He'd learned long ago that true help meant more than just money. It meant giving someone the tools to build their own future. Tomorrow, he decided he would approach Ander and his mom, not with empty promises or quick fixes, but with a real plan. Because sometimes all it takes is one person believing in you, one hand reaching out at the right moment to change everything. The morning felt different somehow. The air was crisp, carrying the scent of possibility. Ander stood at his usual spot, adjusting his crutches while humming softly. His mom had taken a rare morning off to watch him perform, sitting nearby on a wooden bench, her work uniform carefully folded in her bag. The man in the grey coat approached slowly after Ander finished Bridge Over Troubled Water. No phone in hand for pictures, no camera for videos, just a quiet presence and eyes that seemed to understand something deep about life. "That was beautiful," he said simply, his voice carrying a slight accent. "I'm David Lynn." The name hung in the air for a moment before Andrew's mom gasped softly. Everyone knew about Tomorrow Tech and its founder, the immigrant boy who built an empire from nothing. But David wasn't interested in talking about his success. Instead, he asked Ander about his songs, about what music meant to him. He listened like someone who knew the value of every word, nodding at just the right moments. "I've been watching you perform," David admitted, "because I saw something familiar in your eyes. The same fire I had when I was young, trying to prove that circumstances don't define destiny." He turned to Andrew's mom, his expression gentle. "My mother worked 3 jobs too. She used to say that tired hands build strong futures." Andrew's mom wiped a tear, recognizing the truth in those words. The morning crowd flowed around them, but in that moment, they were in their own little bubble of understanding. David pulled out a worn leather wallet, not the expensive kind you'd expect from a billionaire. From it, he took an old photo. A young boy in threadbare clothes, standing proudly with a science project made from recycled parts. "This was me," he said. "Everyone said I couldn't succeed because we were too poor, because my English wasn't perfect. But one person believed in me, my science teacher. Sometimes that's all you need." He shared his idea then, carefully and clearly, not charity but opportunity. A foundation that would cover Andrew's medical treatments using the latest technology and best doctors. But more than that, a chance to develop his talent properly with vocal coaches who understood both music and working with different abilities. "The foundation won't just be for you," David explained. "You'll be the first, but not the last. There are other kids out there with gifts the world needs to hear, see, and feel. Kids who just need someone to believe in them." Andrew's mom started to protest about the cost, but David raised his hand gently. "Money is just paper," he said. "What matters is what we do with the chances we're given. I believe your son can change lives with his voice. I've seen it already, right here in this station." The plan was comprehensive but careful. Andrew would continue his regular schooling. Education was non-negotiable. The medical treatments would be scheduled around his studies. Vocal training would come later, once his health was stable. "But here's the most important part," David said, looking straight at Andrew. "You never have to pretend to be anyone else. Keep singing at the station if you want. Keep being yourself. Success shouldn't change who you are. It should just give you more chances to be that person." The morning light streamed through the station windows, casting long shadows on the floor. A train rumbled past, and Andrew thought about all the mornings he'd spent here, singing his heart out, not knowing that someone was watching, understanding, planning to help. His mom was crying now, but they were different tears from the worried ones he'd seen so many nights. David handed her a business card, simple, white, with just a phone number. "Take time to think about it," he said. "Talk it over as a family. The opportunity won't disappear." As David turned to leave, he paused. "You know," he said, looking back at Andra, "some people think success is about being in the right place at the right time. But I think it's about being the right person, with the right heart, who never stops believing. You're that person, Andra. You just need the tools to spread your wings. 3 years can change everything. Standing at the podium of the newly built Lynn Arts Academy, Andrew looked out at the sea of faces before him. His old crutches stood in a glass case in the lobby, not hidden away, but displayed proudly as a reminder of where it all began. The academy was beautiful, all gleaming windows and wide, accessible hallways. Every detail had been carefully planned to make sure anyone, regardless of their physical challenges, could pursue their dreams here. But more than the building, it was the spirit inside that made it special. Andrew walked to the center of the stage, his steps steady after years of innovative treatments. The doctors had worked wonders, but it was his own determination that pushed him through countless hours of physical therapy. Some days had been harder than others, but he kept his mother's words close. You're not defined by what you can't do. In the front row sat his mom, dressed in a new blue suit instead of her old work uniforms. She'd become the Academy's community outreach director, bringing her years of real-world wisdom to help other struggling families. Next to her, David Lynn smiled proudly, looking exactly like he had that morning at the train station, down to his simple gray coat. When I started singing at 51st Street Station, Andrew began, his voice carrying clearly through the auditorium, I was just trying to help my mom put food on the table. I didn't know I was also feeding people's souls. Gentle laughter rippled through the crowd. The Academy's first class of students sat together, 25 talented kids who might have been overlooked by the world. A girl with Down syndrome who painted like she could see colors nobody else could. A boy in a wheelchair whose violin playing could make stones weep. A teenager with autism whose dance movements told stories without words. Mr. B, the security guard from the station, had taken a new job as the Academy's head of security. Keeping an eye on multiple talented kids now, he'd joke, but his pride in their achievements was obvious. Miss Rose had closed her corner store and now ran the Academy's cafe, still making sure nobody went hungry while chasing their dreams. On the walls hung photos of Andrew's journey, from the viral video days to his first public concert after the surgeries, but his favorite was a simple snapshot of him sitting at the station, captured by a commuter on an ordinary morning. That had been the real him, raw and pure, singing because his heart knew no other way to fly. This academy isn't just about teaching arts, Andrew continued. It's about teaching the world to see differently, to look past what they think is impossible and see what's actually possible. He gestured to the students. Every single person here has been told you can't at some point. But look at us now. The academy had become more than just a school. It was a symbol of hope, a place where talent and determination mattered more than physical limitations. Kids from all over the country applied, drawn by the promise that their dreams would be taken seriously here. David had kept his word about letting Andrew stay true to himself. Once a month, he still sang at the old station, his voice stronger but just as soulful. The morning commuters still stopped to listen, now joined by tourists who'd heard the story and came to witness a piece of living history. Someone once told me that success shouldn't change who you are, it should just give you more chances to be that person, Andrew said, smiling at David. That's what we're building here. Not just a school, but a place where being yourself is the greatest strength you can have. His old baseball cap, the one that had collected so many coins and dreams, sat framed next to his crutches in the lobby. Under it, a simple plaque read, "Every voice deserves to be heard." It wasn't just about singing anymore, it was about all the different ways people could share their gifts with the world. As Andrew looked out at the gathered faces, his mom, David, the students, the staff, reporters and supporters, he felt the familiar warmth in his chest that came before a song. But this time, he wasn't singing alone. The whole academy had become his harmony, each person adding their own unique note to the melody of possibility.